But looking at this Torah portion, we've been looking at the life of Joseph. What was lost among the nations is going to be revealed, and that's where this section, in a lot of ways, kicks off with. It kicks off with this time where the brothers have returned, and they don't know exactly what kind of reception they're going to receive. And we understand this, and since God is the Aleph and the Tav, He's the Alpha and the Omega, the Eternal One, the beginning. He sees the beginning. He sees the end from the beginning. So even our own lives, even all that we are, according to Psalm 139, all the days ordained for us have been written in His book before even one of them came to be. Right? We know that. We understand that. And even though He knows it all, the hard part is He doesn't always tell it all. He doesn't tell us everything that He's doing or everything that He's planning. He doesn't share it all with us. In fact, when you read that in Proverbs, it's the glory of God to conceal a matter. It's the glory of kings to search it out. So He knows where everything is going. But He chooses in many ways to conceal it. You and I, when it comes to the plan and the will of God, we're on a need-to-know basis. How many of y'all like that? Like being on a need-to-know basis? I don't. I really don't like it. I want to know. I'm like my son in a lot of ways. He's worse than I am. He doesn't like surprises. He wants to know what's coming. He wants to know what's right around the corner, so to speak. But he feels no need to fill us in on all of that. But what's the hope in all of this? What's the clue in all of this? Is that it is, if you want to have the heart of a king, if you want to have a heart like a man or a woman after God's own heart, what are you going to do? You're going to search out the things that He has concealed. And the question is, where has He concealed these matters that we even have the opportunity to look into them, to look for them, and hope to find them? Where do we find that? Ultimately, it's right here. It's in His Torah. It's in His Word. So He hides the goal. He hides the destination. He conceals the end. He conceals the Messiah. He conceals the kingdom, the millennium, even in all the way from the beginning, because He has seen it all from there. That means that we should be able to find insights into where we are going in the future by looking even all the way back at Genesis. And most of y'all are already aware of that. We see that in Isaiah 46. He says, "Remember the former things of old, for I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, from ancient time, what is yet to come, saying, my purpose will stand, and I will accomplish all that I please." All right, He does speak. He does reveal. He does declare, because that also is a testimony to who He is. Nobody else, no other God, no other prophet out there, unless they are sent from Him, can do what He says and cannot thwart His will. But He is looking for people who will worship Him in spirit and in truth. As Acts 17 talks about, He wants us to search for Him and perhaps grope around for Him and find Him. And He actually does want His people to have some idea of what to look for, so that as 1 Thessalonians 5 talks about that, so that we are not in the dark when these things start to happen. And so He shares it in His Word, and He reveals it to His prophets. For the Lord Adonai will do nothing unless He has revealed His counsel to His servants, the prophets. He conceals matters, but He also reveals those things to His people, to His prophets, so that we will have an understanding. If we truly have, if we are a man or a woman after God's own heart, we will be seeking after those things that He has concealed. And Yeshua Himself confirmed, God's intention in hiding and concealing something is so that he can reveal it at the right time for his kingdom, for his glory. Luke 8:17 says, "For nothing is hidden that will not become evident, nor secret that shall not be known and come into open view." So he is hiding things, but he intends to bring it out. He intends to make it known. Even those things, even in the healings and the miracles that he does. When he was asked, why was this person born this way? Why was this person born? Was it his parents or was it himself that he sinned? And that's why he was born like this. And he says, no, this happened so that the glory of God might be revealed in him. And so that reason was hidden, and he was in his 30s before the outcome was revealed. And that's so often how he works. He conceals things with the intention of it being revealed. So again, we can look into Genesis for things that are concealed, and in them we see significance in moments when we do have a glimpse of something revealed. And Joseph follows this pattern with his brothers and with his family. So in a lot of ways, the Messiah mirrors, the things that happen to Messiah mirrors what happens in Joseph's life. Joseph, he is hidden among the nations. He has become unrecognizable. We talked about this more extensively last week. His brothers can't even recognize him, and they never even considered that he could speak Hebrew. This is some of the things that we read about. It says, Joseph was the ruler over the land. He was the provider of grain for all the people of the earth. Then Joseph's brothers came and bowed down to him with faces to the ground. And when Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he made himself unrecognizable to them. And though Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. And then on the language, just a few verses later, it says, they did not know that Joseph was listening, because they started talking amongst themselves in their own language. But he didn't understand what was going on, since there was an interpreter between them. So again, Messiah, things that happen to Messiah mirrors what happens in Joseph's life. And so Messiah is hidden among the nations. He's not recognized even today in many respects by the Jewish people. And most aspects of his Jewish identity and his lifestyle have been lost. They don't see a Jewish Messiah. They see, the Gentile Christ and different things like that, in whose name, great persecutions have come, among other things, in whose teachings his people supposedly have permission to just walk away from everything that they have been founded for, and abandon the ways and the halakha of the Torah and such. To their eyes, Joseph is no longer their brother, but an Egyptian. And to many of the Jewish people's eyes, he's no longer a Jewish Messiah. So life for the brothers, this is what was interesting in looking at this. Life, even for the brothers, before Joseph is revealed, is much like it is also for the Jewish people before Messiah is revealed. His brothers, they know that he's been sent out. They know that he's gone. They might wonder where Joseph is, what happened to him, are we ever going to see him again? All the while, toward where Joseph was, where he is living, where Joseph is at, there is fear, there's mistrust, there's uncertainty, there's hesitation, there's misunderstanding, there's concealment. All of these emotions that they have toward Joseph, who's right there in front of them. Is that not how many of the Jewish people live today? Wondering where Messiah is. Wondering what's taking so long. Will we ever see him in our lifetime? Will we see him moving and acting? Will we be delivered? Don't they distrust and misunderstand those in whom Messiah is disguised? Even the Christian world. So consider what we have done to those Jews who have come to believe in looking at Simeon. What have we done when Jewish people have come to believe? What have we done? What have we made them do? Simeon, he is taken by Joseph when his brothers, they first return home. And that parallels what happened to many Jewish people who come to Messiah throughout church history and in still some church circles today. Rather than going home to proclaim Messiah to their families, they found their lost brother. Church history has forced many of these Jewish people to stay in Egypt. You can't go back to what you were. You can't go back to your family. You can't live like you used to live. Today it's practically expected that Jews will no longer go home and live like Jews anymore. Now that they know Messiah, but that they would stay and assimilate to life in Egypt, in this case the Gentile church. That they would come and live more like us, be like us, rather than be like who they are, and as life in the Torah requires. They were supposed to give up their old way of life, their feast days, their diet, their day of worship, and take on all the new things that we have brought on, that conceal and hide his identity. As if we expect Simeon, to a lot of ways, lose his identity just like Joseph did. And this has put the brothers, the Jewish people, under a great kind of distress as the day is approaching. The longer it goes on, the closer the day approaches, the more distress there is, because the brothers, as they went home and were told, don't come back unless you bring Benjamin with him, they have no idea what happened to Simeon while they were gone. Y'all realize that? They don't know if he's even still alive either. They know that Joseph has been holding on to him, but as far as they're concerned, he's gone until we come back. They were unwilling to risk losing another brother in Benjamin. That was so much of their fear. Their whole identity as a people was in jeopardy. And they feared the death of even their father, of even Israel as a whole, should they lose another brother, because would it ever stop at that point? Because we could soon and quickly lose us all. And this caused them grief. It would lead them to repentance in a lot of ways. We should never have done this, didn't we? We should have never done this to our brother Joseph. But it'll also cause them to rally to each other's defense. They come to their aid. It mirrors what we see in the Jewish world in many ways today. There is a sense of greater unity, a greater protection among them, a greater willingness to fight for one another. And upon their return to Egypt, you even have Judah willing to lay down his life for his brothers. He takes responsibility. He begins that leadership. In chapter 44, verse 33, he says, this is Judah speaking. He says, so now, please, let your servant remain as my Lord's slave in the boy's place, and let the boy go up with his brother. He's saying, look, all of this happened. If you remember, it was kind of arranged for Benjamin to be caught with the special items from Joseph's house. And so he was going to be getting in the most trouble for all of these events. But at this point, Judah is stepping up and willing to take his place. So in this great distress, in these great moments, there is a coming together. And we've seen some of that. But as we see Messiah revealed, and we get closer to those moments, throughout church history, as Joseph or as Messiah is hidden in Egypt among the nations, the Jewish people have had to stick together as much as they can. There are some divisions, of course, but there are some things that are common among them. There are some things that are practiced in Jewish communities, and that's almost no matter where you live, where they're from, whether it's in America, whether it's in Europe, whether it's Africa, Southeast Asia. There are some things that they hold in common even to this day. But what's going to happen when Messiah is revealed? As that moment approaches, in a lot of ways it's going to parallel what we see happening when Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. It says, now Joseph could no longer restrain himself in front of all those who were standing by him. So he cried out, Get everyone away from me. And so no one stood with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. Verse 3 says, Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? And his brothers were unable to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Verse 5 goes on and says, so now, this is Joseph speaking to them, don't be grieved, don't be angry in your own eyes that you sold me here, since it was for preserving life that God sent me here before you. So those emotions that the brothers were expressing when Joseph reveals himself, the first one is that says they were terrified. That's the word bahal. It's to disturb, alarm, be anxious, be afraid, be nervous. And what's in here is also to be in haste, to be hasty or hurried, to tremble inwardly and to palpitate. To be in haste in some respects is talking about how they were wanting to get out of there as fast as they could, because they didn't know what exactly was going to happen. The next word he talks about, don't being grieved, estab. It says to hurt, to pain, to grieve. But it also has this idea of shaping or fashioning, to make form, stretch into shape. It means from this primitive to carve, fabricate, or fashion. It's like the process of cutting or grinding into something in order to change its shape or appearance that requires an extended amount of time and pressure. Y'all ever heard of a worry stone? Do y'all know what those are? What are those? There's like those little things that you can rub in your hand when you're anxious, when you're nervous, and what eventually starts happening to those?
They start wearing.
They'll start wearing down. This hard stone will eventually get a nice, if it doesn't already come with one, a nice little dip in it, and you can, through your fingering, through your nervous attention to it, it'll eventually change the shape of a stone. You'll wear even a little smooth spot in it. That's the kind of nervousness that's going on here. They're grieved in that regard. It's changing them. It's also that sense of being angry, chara, as to be hot or furious, burn or become angry. It has the connection to fire, being kindled, glow or growing warm. So who would they be mad at that point? Probably each other, right? They start blaming and pointing fingers and all these other kind of things. Or even mad at God, saying, God, why did you allow this to happen? Do we see that? We see that a lot. So the brothers, when what was concealed is revealed, when they see Joseph without all the disguise, without all the things that are hidden, when they see Joseph in his true identity, they are shocked, they are terrified, because they knew that they had rejected him. They knew that they were the ones that cast him out to the nations. And some within the brotherhood already knew that, we should never have done that. Like Reuben in chapter 42. Or when it comes to Messiah, like Nicodemus before the Sanhedrin. But when they were looking at that situation, they were looking at it saying, guys, we should never have done this, but what are we going to do about it now? There's nothing we can change about this situation now. There's no solution at this point. And so their first response upon the revealing was to regret that choice, to fear retribution from him. And this is the same kind of expected response when Messiah Yeshua is revealed at his second coming. When his feast first step on the Mount of Olives, there's this passage in Zechariah. It says, I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. Okay, that's Joseph's attitude. When they will look toward me whom they pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only son, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn. To Jacob, to Israel, this was the firstborn. He was the firstborn of that contract, that ketubah. But this is the same kind of moment in Joseph's life as what will be for the nation when Messiah Yeshua is revealed. But Messiah is going to react much like Joseph does. He's not looking for vengeance. He's not looking for retribution in those things. When the moment of revelation finally comes, instead of all of that, there are tears mixed with joy at finally being able to disclose and finally being able to tell who he is. And then there's the very first thing that he asks about, I am Joseph, I am your brother. But his first thing he says is my father, is Israel still alive? Are my people still alive? That is going to be Messiah's concern upon his return. Are my people still alive? Because he is coming to bring justice. He is coming to bring salvation. And he is seeking their status. This is, I'm missing something here. Luke chapter 18, he says, won't God do justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he be slow to help them? I tell you, he will quickly give them justice. But when the Son of Man comes, will he find his faith on earth? He's wanting to seek them. He's wanting to find them. He's hoping to see all of these things. This is Messiah's concern for his people. And it's important for us to understand and to know, his going out to the Gentiles was also part of the plan all along. That the nations would be blessed and brought in. That was part of the promise given to Abraham all the way back in chapter 12. But through this action, even the kings of the earth are affected. Even Pharaoh is affected because Joseph is said to become a father to Pharaoh. Joseph says, he made me as a father to Pharaoh, lord over his whole house, and ruler over the entire land of Egypt. As a father to Pharaoh, and this is one of those indications that they say Pharaoh at this time was young, or at least younger than Joseph, maybe inexperienced, but Pharaoh obeys Joseph's instructions. Joseph says, hey, this is what you should do, and he says, you're the man to do it. And since the word of Joseph, what's the source of the interpretation that Joseph said in the previous Torah portion? The interpretation comes from God. So the word of Joseph is really the word from God. And so it is as if Pharaoh is obeying the will of God. And this is important for us to understand because there are those who have said throughout the centuries, trying to assign and lay blame of who killed Jesus, who killed him. And what has the church often said throughout history? Well, the Jews, they killed Jesus, right? And in response, and so they use that as an attack against them. And so in response, a lot of people said, no, it wasn't the Jewish people that killed him, it was the Romans who killed him. Or we'll often say, well, it was all of us, it was our sin who killed him. But again, Joseph and his words parallel the reality of the situation. In chapter 45, verse 5, he says, since it was for preserving life that God sent me here before you. Verse 7, but God sent me ahead of you to ensure a remnant in the land and to keep you alive for a great escape. Verse 8, so now it was not you. You did not send me here, but God did. And I don't have this in here, but it parallels that statement in Isaiah 53. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Chapter 53 of Isaiah, verse 10. Yet it pleased Adonai to bruise him, for he caused him to suffer. If he makes his soul a guilt offering, he will see his offspring, he will prolong his days. So this was all God's intention all along. And what's interesting, when you look at that word, he sent or send, is the word shalach, which means to send away, to let go or stretch out, to extend or direct, to let go or even set free. And this one was really interesting here, to shoot forth, as in talking about branches. To shoot off or send out a branch. Of course, what is Messiah known as? He's called the branch. And he's from where? Nazareth, which means the branch. Right? But this is also, what's also really interesting about this word is when you look at its translation in the Septuagint. All three times it's a variation of this Greek word 649. It's the word apostello, which means essentially that God sent Joseph as an apostle, first to his brothers, to his family, the Jewish people, then to Egypt and the nations. Does that sound familiar? To the Jew first, and then also to the Greek. All right. You also see that the wealth and the best of the nations come to Israel through Joseph, come through the Messiah. And these are some other similarities here in this moment. He says, when he tells them to go back, he says, "Get your father, your household, and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land." In verse 20, he says, "Don't be concerned about your goods, because the best of all the land of Egypt is yours." That's some of the prophecy. That's some of the things that is expected. The best and the wealth of the nations becomes theirs. And another similarity is the sense of that belief for Israel that Joseph is even still alive. Belief that it's even real, that his sons are telling him the truth at all, starts when he begins to see the wagons. Look at chapter 45, verse 25. It says, "Then they went up from Egypt and came to the land of Canaan, to Jacob their father. And they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler of the whole land of Egypt. His heart went numb, for he did not believe them." I mean, that's a hard story to tell. A hard story to accept, a hard story to believe. But it says, "But they told him all of Joseph's words that he had told them. And when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to pick him up, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And then then Israel said, 'Enough, my son Joseph is still alive. I must go and see him before I die.'" Not until Jacob, not until Israel saw the wagons from Egypt did he really begin to believe and understand that what the brothers had said about Joseph was true. It's this moment of the gathering. It's not until he starts to being gathered that he really begins to understand and believe that he is. That also parallels our day. And I know this is not a new concept, but I know I've talked about it a lot here, that there are more Jewish people coming to faith in Messiah in the last 50 to 60 years or more than in any other time in church history since the first century. We are seeing something happening in our day. And so what's been the change? What's been the cause of it? And so much of it can be attributed to this parallel of the Jewish people, this gradual gathering of Israel back to the land. These beginning stages of a return. It's not necessarily happening all at once at this time, but it's beginning to happen. And there has to be, and you think about this, in order for when Messiah returns, in order for him to hear from his people, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, right? Isn't that part of the prophecy? Don't his people have to be there in order for them to say it? Yes. So there's some that have to be there in that place before that can be said. And, it's been noted that many of the Jewish people, when they returned to Israel, especially early on, were very secular, or they had lost belief in God because of their hardships and experiences. But it's also been reported that the longer the people are in the land, and the generations that have followed have a greater understanding and a faith in God the longer that they are there. because they're seeing these places that they've read about all their life. They're seeing this fulfillment of these things happening in their day. So it's no accident that the more are beginning to see even Yeshua as Messiah. This initial regathering and the final regathering are all a part of His return. Isaiah 43 puts it like this. He says, "Since you are precious in my eyes, honored because I love you, I will give a man in exchange for you and other peoples for your life." Does that sound familiar at all? He says, "Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bring your offspring from the east and gather you from the west. I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, do not hold them back. Bring my sons from far and my daughters from the ends of the earth. Everyone who is called by my name, who I created for my glory, I formed him. Yes, I made him." This is a prophecy about the gathering. From everywhere, they're going to be coming home. And even Matthew and Yeshua refers to it in Matthew 24. "Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the land will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory." And he says, "He will send out his angels with a great shofar, and they will gather together his chosen from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other." And it wasn't until then, it wasn't until that time of gathering, of seeing these things beginning to take place, that did Israel fully begin to believe and understand that what the brothers said about the revealing of Joseph, the revealing of Messiah, was true. And that's when we talk about the faith of Joseph. We mentioned that earlier. This is when we get to see the faith of Joseph. That before he's willing to leave what he understood to be that promised land and enter what represents in many ways the kingdom, the millennial kingdom, he stops and hears from God. He gets this confirmation from God, and God gives him this permission to leave, to go, to step out. He says, "I am God, the God of your father," he said. "Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will turn you into a great nation there. I myself will go down with you to Egypt. I myself will also most certainly bring you up. Joseph will put his hand on your eyes." But I want you to see and think about and consider this pattern that is set up in all of this. That shows the hope of Messiah. You know, it's through Israel, through Joseph, saves Egypt, just as Messiah saves the nations. And the nations, through Joseph, saves Israel. So Israel develops into a great nation and kingdom in the best of the land, with the king, with Joseph essentially ruling over them, with Messiah ruling. It's through the work of Joseph that everything in Egypt is handed over to Pharaoh. It's through the work of Messiah that everything is handed over to his Father. And we see that mentioned in 1 Corinthians 15. He says, "Each in its own order, in its proper time, in its proper place, in its revealed times and moments. Messiah, the first fruits, then at his coming, those who belong to Messiah. Then the end, when he hands over the kingdom to God the Father, after he has destroyed all rule and all authority and power." Everything is leading to this moment. Everything is pointed in this direction, and he is told, in many respects, the end from the beginning. And those with the heart for God, for heart for their King, will seek out what he has concealed, because it's there. And we are seeing in our day, in our generations, the gathering, the days of Joseph being fulfilled in many ways in our day, and that is cause for rejoicing. And that is also cause for expectation, that is cause for even celebration and preparation. Because there are many things that we have yet to do. There are many, as the days are shortening, then we have less time to accomplish what he wants us to accomplish. And the enemy also knows that his days are shortening, doesn't he? And what does he do as things shorten? Doesn't he kick it up a notch? Doesn't he try to do even more and harm even more the purpose and the plans of God? So we just need to understand and know the days and the times that we are in and what we are a part of and what is perhaps in our future. And knowing that he has seen it all. The end from the beginning. We should never lose hope. We should never despair. We should never forget where he is taking his people.